Check it out. I made a slideshow so I didn't have to video edit. Pretty lazy, I mean smart. Still took a long time to make though. Anyway, Hollow Knight is a good game, and I've heard a lot of good things about the company that made it, Team Cherry. The initial release of the game did have a full game with an ending, but it didn't have everything they wanted, so they released paid DLC, but after a while it became included in the game for free. So the fandom wiki has some things that are labeled DLC, which used to be true, but there's no way to buy the DLC now, it's just part of the game. And this is true for every version of the release, not just the PC version. This review will be spoiler-free. That text needs to be edited, that's not true anymore. There's no tips. This review will be spoiler-free. I made a separate tips video which contains as few spoilers as possible. For reference to spoilers, anything that ruins a surprise or influences how you play the game, so obviously tips would be minor spoilers. Yeah, there aren't any tips or warnings in this video. I split that into a separate video, which I'll have a card for in the corner. But using the name Failed Champion isn't a spoiler since it means nothing ahead of time. Stating that he's harder than any other upgraded boss and showing a short clip of the fight does technically ruin a surprise, but I'd rather you avoid possible frustration, so it's more like an enhancement of a spoiler. Plus, I'm trying not to be overly paranoid about spoilers. It's fine. Here's the ranking scale I'll use when talking about the game's overall quality. I had a lot more complex rating system, but it boiled down to this, and 2 and 3 are the same level of good, but 2 leans into the genre more, which limits the audience, but doesn't make the game worse. So I might have a different ranking next time if I make another game review. My rating for Hollow Knight is absolutely radiant. Intentional pun. And I'm not alone in this. It received plenty of awards, has a Metascore of 87, and overwhelmingly positive Steam reviews. But no game is for everyone, which is why my highest rating includes a genre caveat. Personally, I dislike Souls-like, and I'm meh about Metroidvania, and I still liked the game and could tell it's very good. Very well made. If you actually like these genres, it'll probably butter your toast, or at least be worth your time. These genres are Souls-like and 2D Metroidvania. I'll explain what I mean by that in a bit. But first some terms so you know what I'm talking about. The currency is named Geo. Your health is measured in masks. Magic is called Soul, which is stored in the Soul Vessel. Charms are equipment, which you can put on or off. Your sword is called a nail. There's an in-game display that shows your percent, which has a max of 112. So that's confusing that 100% of the game is labeled 112%. So if I say in-game percent, I mean the one that the game shows you. And if I say actual 100%, I mean what the game calls 112%, plus some stuff that doesn't count for percent, such as beating Pantheon 5 and some achievements like Happy Couple. Hollow Knight is a Souls-like. Here's why I say that. It's difficult with a focus on dodging bosses, the world is falling apart, a lot of places look dreary, depressing although the NPCs are making the best of it, you drop your Geo, which is money, on death, but can go recover it. Most backstory is told through descriptions in the best area and through the environment. Very little current event plots with short, vague cutscenes with cryptic NPC dialogue. Hollow Knight is a 2D Metroidvania. It's got things to collect like mask upgrade, soul upgrade, charms, equipment, just money are scattered and hidden, requiring various upgrades to reach. Encouraged to explore and backtrack, you can unlock some limited fast traveling. Non-linear, but not open world. Typically a Metroidvania is linear, but non-linear fits the genre even better. The upgrades seem linear, but there's a surprising number of variations in the order. I'll cover how nonlinear it is in a later slide, and also cover the combat in a later slide for Souls-like stuff. Hollow Knight is not a platformer. I bought the game thinking that it had plenty of hard platforming and was disappointed by its lack. Hard platforming definitely exists and is required for Dream No More or Embrace the Void endings, but not the Hollow Knight ending. There's some regular platforming for some collectibles throughout, but hard platforming is only in 2 areas, the Queen's Garden and the White Palace. For this slide, I made a list of everything that might possibly offend someone in case you didn't want to play a game with one of these things. There's plenty of depressing and slightly scary stuff. That's what you get for being a Souls-like. But I thought it's fair to warn you that if you're afraid of spiders in a dark area with lots of creepy sounds, then you're not going to be able to beat DeepNest. Personally, I could only handle DeepNest for an hour at a time, so I had to leave and come back. Combat is important. As a Souls-like, combat is important. The video is a montage of me losing to the 4th hardest boss because I figured it would motivate people who want hard bosses, and it shows generally how combat works without spells, using the charms, Quick Slash, Steady Bodies, Thorns of Agony, Boulder Shell. It looks like the same death on loop, but it's actually a 21 deaths in 13 minutes, which is an average of 37 seconds per fight. This is a 5-minute clip of that, but you can see the full thing linked in an info card. I thought about using the hardest boss, but I didn't die nearly as fast in those. There's 46 bosses, excluding fake outs and a joke, and plenty of enemies. Most combat is done with a sword called a nail, however there's also damaging spells and nail arts. There are very limited shields, but fighting revolves around knowing where to stand to not get hit or dashing out of the way. Dashing isn't a Dark Souls role. You actually have to dodge, since you typically aren't invincible while dashing. Also, you don't start with it, but you get it pretty early. There's a Basteria to fill out, and the Hall of Gods lets you refight 44 of the bosses. The other 2 are the last bosses. The last bosses you can refight in their normal place, but it's less convenient and there's unskippable credits. Although the Hall of Gods does have their upgraded forms, so they're basically in the hall. If you're thinking about why I put the Failed Champion as the 4th hardest boss, and are wondering how I rank every boss, then check the description for my top 15 in order, spoiler-free from memory. The game also has an arena filled with normal enemies, and there's the Eternal Ordeal as well. Sort of like a second arena. Challenge. I died about 90 times, excluding Godhome, to get an actual 100%, and the hardest 2 bosses took me about 4 hours each to practice. Difficulty curve is fine because the game is not linear, so you can leave and come back later, except the Soul Sanctum, which is early game with hard enemies, and the hard platforming in the Queen's Garden and the White Palace, because even doing them in that order is a bit of a jump in platforming difficulty. But I know that the SL1 Dark Souls players want to make the game even harder, and you can. You can beat the game without upgrading your nails, spells, mask, or soul, and can choose not to wear any charms. Godhome has Pantheons, which are boss rushes, which have bindings, which restrict your stats further. Hall of Gods has difficulties to select from for refighting the bosses. You can also just choose not to dash and beat them hitless, having the Delicate Flowers optional. And of course, the opposite side is also possible. To make the game easier, use every tool available. When you're having trouble, go find more charms or upgrades. Difficulty is only fun if it's fair, and indeed the combat and platforming is fair. There's low randomness and rare ambushes. Marmu is a little bit BS, but generally losing is your fault. Almost all damage taken is a single mask, which means getting a new mask is very tangible gain, likewise for getting another soul vessel. There's minimal glitches. I played for about 101 hours and only saw 1 crash. There was a handful of times when healing broke. To heal, you have to focus your soul for a second, but these times, when it broke, it would start focusing, consume some soul, and then just stop, even though I still held the button and didn't get hit. So I just lose some time and soul for no health gain. which is very annoying, but rare enough that I didn't actually lose because of it, although one was close. I didn't have a problem with healing for most of the game, but then started seeing this every other hour, so I don't know if it's a Hall of Gods thing or if it's always been a thing and I just didn't heal enough to notice. The only other relevant glitch is your HUD sometimes shows wrong mask count when you take 1 damage while healing with deep focus. This is fixed by either gaining or losing health. When you die, you leave a shade behind who has all of your geo, and it's easy, and some of your soul vessel. It's easy to get back to your shade except for some bosses where your shade is inside the boss room instead of by the door. But if you need help recovering it, you can use Jiji or a Drain Gate. Personally, I lost 0 geo from death and never needed assistance for the shade. Some bosses scale, but nail upgrades still make the fight shorter. Enemies don't scale. I think the reason for scaling was to make sure the boss didn't get too easy if you do things in a different order. The most unfair thing in the game is some insanity-based gameplay. The first is caused by unmarked breakable walls, floors, which encourage you to attack everything for no reason. The other 2 insanities are an enemy that is seemingly invincible but gives no indication, gives no indication that it isn't invincible, but can in fact be killed. And there's some mushroom text that you can't read until you do a certain something, which has no indication of what you're supposed to do. There's also illusionary walls, which are like unmarked breakable walls, but faster to check. Together, if you insist on sanity and doing nothing that the game doesn't hint at, then you'd miss a good chunk of stuff, including a couple charms, which give %, grubs, a few achievements, 300 dream essence, some geo, a king's idol, lore, an unlockable main menu theme, and quality content, including a boss, and the Eternal Ordeal has just a bunch of enemies to fight. And Path of Pain is the difficult platforming section in the game. The most difficult platforming section of the game. Granted, the Weaver's Den is easy to guess where it is if you think with video game logic, but the rest are impossible. In fact, the enemy goes against what the game hints at. Hints at him being invincible, I mean. It's easy to look up the Weaver's Den, White Defender, Crystal Crawler, Mr. Mushroom, and Path of Pain, but the White Palace Nursery is hard to look up, and even the Eternal Ordeal is hard to find even if you know where it is. I shouldn't need a guide to play your games, you jerks. I should be able to do everything by studying the game and not by doing things that make no sense. You could argue that illusionary walls exist to encourage exploring, but that's crap. It instead makes you not trust what you see and hence insanity. If every breakable wall had cracks, then my complaint would be that the cracks are too hard to see, which is true, but doesn't compare to having no cracks at all. As for missables, there's not many, but there's also no reason for most of them to be missable. We'll cover that in the tips video for how to avoid missing missable things. This entire slide is a summary of everything bad that I could think of about the game, and it's not that much. Overall, the game is very fair, it looks good, sounds great, NPCs are worth talking to, it's interesting lore, combat's fun, charms have a good variety, there's a variety of rewards for exploring. This game is great, even though nothing's perfect. Plus, in my tips video, linked in an info card, I have a minor spoiler slide that shows how to fix all insanities, in which case my biggest problem with the game would be that cracked walls are too hard to see. Oh, and there's no soft locks. Even if you have no tram pass, no stags, no dive, and 0 geo, you won't get trapped in the resting grounds because the stag will take you to Dirtmouth. Glad they thought of that. Exploring is important. The text shown here has some crazy sequences that are totally valid. They don't require any skips or glitches. Although without a lantern, you basically need to memorize a large dark room, which isn't practical. The flowchart at the bottom shows how nonlinear the game is without actually giving any hints on what to do. The top left image is every charm in the game, only half of which you buy, the rest you find. Or earn. The top right image is every optional thing to collect and their counts. If this doesn't sell Metroidvania, then nothing will, since there's a ton of stuff to find, and I can't show you the actual map because that would be a spoiler. But it's not a collectathon, it's a proper Metroidvania where you have to earn everything except some unguarded geocaches or money rocks, which are there to help you out if you lost it all from death. The game cares about backstory but not current event plot. Most backstory is told through descriptions in the bestiaria and through the environment. Backstory has a lot to piece together, and there's theories around it. It's hard to understand, so if you don't make an effort, you won't get it, which is probably great for a history buff. There's very little current events plot, with short, vague cutscenes and cryptic NPC dialogue. The plot consists mostly of Hornet talking to you a few times, getting the Dream Nail, getting the 3 MacGuffins, then getting the Hollow Knight ending. There's tons of backstory and interesting things happening in the past, but you don't get to play during the interesting part of history, because today there's basically nothing happening. So I had to ask, why? They could have made this game where we'd play as one of the 5 knights, there's a plot twist, and everything falls apart for a tragic ending, and that would have been a good plot, good game. But this game doesn't do that. It's possible to discover the past while current events are happening. Look at the Lightbringer book series for a great example. However, the game Hollow Knight doesn't do that because a lack of current events adds to the feeling that the world is broken. It makes it feel too late. And that's what you'd expect from a Souls-like. I don't care for Souls-likes. As for world building, there's one nation, 1 or 2 groups immigrated, a handful of people groups, 1 minor religion, and by that I mean there were some important people involved in the religion, but the religion itself is hardly mentioned with barely any details. I hesitate to even call it a religion. The King's Idol I wouldn't call a religion at all, I'd call it superstition. But anyway, there's a disease, 14 areas, plenty of NPCs, and a few soft magic systems. The plot is easy to follow what you are doing, minus the endings, but to understand why you're doing it, you need backstory, which, as mentioned, takes work to understand. The game tells you to get the 3 MacGuffins, buying a map will mark a point of interest, and Elderbug will hint at what area to do next. That's all the game tells you about what to do. You have to just explore until you find the thing you need. The endings are vague, but if you know some backstory, require a little guesswork to understand. They're intentionally left open to a little interpretation. There's 3 full endings, 2 variations, and an extra scene which can be added to any ending. I listed them by achievement name. Ending 1 is fine, but is unclear if the problem is solved temporarily or permanently. Ending 2 seems permanent until you get ending 3, which is more certain. Team Cherry has stated that there's no true ending, but that seems like cowardice, since each ending requires significantly more effort and each is more definitive in resolution. Also, ending 3 hints at a sequel, which isn't Silksong since that's a prequel. So I see no reason why ending 3's variation wouldn't be the true ending. Not that the variation is all that different. How long will the game take or last are very reasonable questions to ask, but I'm a bad person to ask since the more open a game is, the slower I go. HowToBeat.com says main story in 26 hours and everything in 60 hours. There's a few speedrun achievements that are very generous if you know what to do and don't die. The guides I looked up had comments saying that getting 8 hours for endgame 100% or 2 hours any percent was easy, and someone got speed completion first time blind. Me, on the other hand, my time is very different because my first playthrough I was paranoid, inefficient, meticulous, and talked to everyone. That's the top file shown in the image. But I played again for some achievements. I followed an any percent speedrun guide, but took some major detours, wasting plenty of time, and still got well under 5-hour mark without dying and no skips. Then I went for the achievements Purity and Banishment while blindly grabbing some extra percent, wasting a bunch of time in the White Palace, and still easily made 20 hours, with a few deaths and no skips. Therefore, I think that how long to beat time, average times, seem reasonable for first play if you played in a reasonable way, unlike me. It feels like most of the game is gray and brown, as you'd expect from Souls-like. However, that's not to say it doesn't look good. It does. And that's not to say there is no color. There's a few areas that I would call pretty. Each area looks a little unique, while still feeling like the same world for the most part. Most NPCs can easily be told apart from enemies. The music has been praised, and the OST can be bought separately. Each area and most bosses have a song. The song playing right now is the main menu song, the press start song, which is just named Hollow Knight. Personally, I thought the music was just okay. The songs that stood out to me as good were the Soul Sanctum and Nightmare King. I liked Celeste's music a lot better, and especially Undertale, but that's just preference. Hollow Knight's songs have a lot of string instruments and organs, so it's more orchestral, whereas Hollow Knight is more 8-bit sounding. There's a couple of places that use silence to build suspense, and that's well executed, but then there's the Ancient Basin, which has no music. I think the idea was that it's supposed to feel wrong, but music isn't pervasive enough for that, and frankly, I don't think there is anything wrong with the area anyway. So instead it comes off as very boring. The area is smaller than most, but you'll want to bring your own music. In addition to the obvious style and songs, there's a bunch of small details that really bring it together, really put the shine on how good things look and feel. You can see a lot of these details in the top video, which is a 44-second clip looped. The bottom is a 6-second clip looped zoomed way in. Also, the... so for the small details, at one mask, black dots start evaporating out of you. The last mask is smoking and vibrating. There's dramatic focus lines centering on the center of the screen, not on you. Whenever you get hurt, there's a spray of black dots. If it's 2+ damage, it's a larger spray with more waves and a louder sound effect. Getting enough soul for a spell causes the main soul vessel to glow briefly and flashes again when it's full, which is 3 spells. Is bright white instead of gray liquid, and it gains eyes when it has a good amount. Also, the blue masks drip occasionally and the white ones shine. If you hit something invincible with your nail, there's a you didn't do damage ting sound effect, but a breakable wall has a you made progress crunching sound effect. There's also a lot of attention to detail in general, and it makes all this just mwah, chef's kiss. If you like achievements, this slide is for you. Yes, Hollow Knight has them. It also has an in-game percent, but the max is weirdly 112. The reason for that is the original game had 100%, then the 4 DLCs added an extra 12, and they just decided to let it go to 112% instead of redoing it to be the new 100%. Or even better, to have separate categories which can each go to 100%. Removing the percent symbol and having it be 112 out of 112 would have been a simple solution, but they didn't do that. But since they didn't do that, talking about 100% is confusing, and it's hard to know if you've gotten everything, because you don't know what the max is. The Hollow Gods will show you what bosses you're missing. It's easy to know if you've gotten the best nail and beaten every Colosseum trial. It's easy to know max masks, soul vessels, and all grubs, because you get achievements for those. And the map will usually indicate if you haven't visited a room, assuming you bought the area map. It's easy to know what charms are missing, and spell upgrades are easy to guess. So the only thing you might not have all of is lore, either from reading a tablet, talking, or selling trinkets. Overall, it's pretty easy to know when you've gotten everything that matters, but there's a ton of little things that are impossible to track. But as for actual achievements, the PS4 version has fewer, at 35, and is a proper subset, except for the Platinum Trophy, which is Heart of Hollowness, acquire all of the trophies, which was added. PS4 lacks several ending achievements, but has most of the important ones. I'll be talking about the other versions on PC, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch. The Nintendo Switch version just displays the achievement in-game. There's 66 achievements. You're expected to get 10 from the story of the first ending, and 7 more for the other endings. 8 for bonus bosses, all but 2 are required for Embrace the Void ending. There's 16 achievements for collecting stuff, 2 are required for other endings. There's 7 endgame ones for completion percent, time, and difficulty, and there's 15 more miscellaneous achievements, 7 of which are required for Embrace the Void ending. Numbers aside, what this means is that there's plenty of boxes to check. The exploring slide should have made it obvious that there's plenty to explore and collect, but some people only care about doing things if there's an achievement for it, and there is. Just about everything that matters is covered by achievements. Embrace the Void achievement alone covers a lot of it. These achievements let you know there's multiple endings, and in the cases of neglect, tap a couple, and banishment, let you know there's non-obvious choices to do. And all of the achievements are good ones. There's no junk that requires waiting, luck, grinding, or losing, etc. All of the achievements are actually achieving something. There are no achievements for doing things like Pantheon 5 All Bindings Hitless, which is the hardest challenge in the game, which can be either good or bad. The good is that you can get every achievement with some difficulty, but not insane difficulty. The bad is that if you can do R5AB, you get nothing and can only prove it with a YouTube video, because unfortunately the Pantheon results screen for All Bindings indicator covers up the hitless indicator. The Steam achievement percent for the rarest few achievements are less than 4% currently. As an achievement nitpick, Steel Soul mode is where you aren't allowed to die, and there's 2 achievements for it, for any percent in in-game 100%. But if you do these things deathless in normal mode, it won't trigger those achievements even though you've earned them. In fact, it's slightly harder since you can't sell rancid eggs. But that's not too bad of a nitpick. And for the record, I did the work for 2 achievements that didn't trigger and obtained the rest except Steel Soul in-game 100%, which I don't care about. If you're colorblind, you'll be fine so long as you can tell apart the mask types shown in the top image. And even then, the context would make it pretty easy to tell them apart, since the gold masks are only from doing a shell binding, and the blue ones are from Lifeblood cocoons. And as I mentioned in Aesthetics 2, the masks have little details to tell them apart. Plus there's the 1 mask left warnings. There's also some optional lore that's color-coded, but that can be told apart by looking for butterflies or balls. There's one door that you need to know is blue, but if you inspect it, the text will tell you it's blue. There's also the butterfly vines to indicate it. Your main soul vessel's hair doesn't mean anything, it just looks nice. There's also a boss that's got color-coded attack telegraphing, but he's also got completely different stances, so you can read him just fine without color. You can play the game without sound if you're like deaf. You'd only miss a few optional hints and an eternal ordeal joke. As for language, you can understand this. If you can understand this review, you'll be fine. If English isn't your primary language, then check out this list of supported languages in the first image. The audio doesn't contain language, which is to say there's no voice acting at all. The supported languages control all text, including the menus and how NPCs talk. If none of these languages work for you, then you could still play most of the game illiterate. Reading is required for the Grey Mourner's Delicate Flower quest, charm descriptions, spells, some items, and shop's tolls, including Divine. Everything else to read is just lore. For responding to text, there's shops and everything else is a yes/no prompt, which is needed for the Delicate Flower and to use the symbol key, etc. Another option for reading is to use the fandom wiki to look up almost any text and paste it into a translator. The exceptions are the Grey Mourner and the tablets from the Teacher's Archive, both pictured in here. For those two, in the English version at least, are very hard to understand because the Grey Mourner uses a bunch of fake words and the tablets use fake words and string together a bunch of words that don't make sense in a sentence. The Grey Mourner I can understand contextually, but the tablets you just kind of read and get a general idea of what it's talking about. So if you're using a translator or a non-primary language, then it's going to be brutal. There's also Bardoon, who uses bad grammar, which is annoying, but probably not an issue. There's plenty of cryptic text, but that'll be true in any language. And if you're trying to do mushroom stuff, your translator isn't broken, you just need to do a certain something before you can read the text. Quickly cover the graphics and specs. The image specs below are from the Steam listing. It supports all 3 major PC OSs. It's on PS4, Nintendo Switch, Xbox One, several major PC distributors, including the Windows Store. Yes, the console version has all 4 content packs included, like the PC version does. I assume they all support 4K graphics, but I don't know because I don't have a 4K monitor, and the PC version has a really cool feature where it will cap the graphics based on your monitor resolution and window size so that it doesn't bother rendering at higher than what you can actually display. I don't know if that's standard, but I really appreciate that it isn't being wasteful. And that's it. If you want to see my super slow speedrun, my super slow Let's Play, that is, of my first run, there's a playlist for that. You could also watch my significantly faster second run. I'll also link my Let's Play channel if you wanted to see what else I've played, which is currently only Mega Man ZX, but I'll play Mario Maker next and some other Switch games. Plus, if you're still listening to me, it's a good sign that you might like my content.